Welcome, settle in, wherever you are. Let the tension ease from your shoulders. Perhaps you're beneath a soft blanket, or listening as twilight darkens the corners of your room. Let your breath slow. Let your thoughts stretch gently outward. Tonight, we'll journey far back in time, to wind-swept fjords and long wooden halls, to the open sea and the dim corners of a smoky home. This is not the Viking Age you've seen in films or video games, not a world of glory and conquest. No, tonight we'll explore the quieter, harsher, more human side of Norse life. Behind the legends of roaring warriors and daring raids was a world of aching backs, endless rowing, biting cold, and humble survival. The Norse lived in tune with the earth and sea, but it was often a rhythm of struggle and strain. In this calm and measured story, we'll move gently through the forgotten realities. A deckhand's miserable day at sea. The strange and brilliant tale of Egil Skallagrimsson. Surprising discoveries about Viking latrines. And finally, a tense feast in a Jarl's mead hall, full of drink and silent glances across sharpened blades. There is no need to stay fully awake. Just let your imagination drift and wander. This is not a tale that demands attention, it welcomes you to float through it. Let us begin now with the creaking of an oar and the chill of sea spray in the wind. Imagine yourself waking before the sun. The sky is still dark, a pale indigo where sea meets cloud. The air smells of salt and wet wood. You sleep on a ship, if it can be called, sleep curled uncomfortably beside crates and coils of rope. Your breath fogs in the early morning chill. The sea is already restless. You are a deckhand on a Viking longship, not a warrior, not a captain, just a man with 2 arms and not much choice. There are no sails today, or if there are, they offer little help. The wind is not in your favor. That means rowing all day. From the moment the crew wakes until the moment the sun disappears, again assuming you lucky enough to stop by nightfall. The oars are heavy. They blister your palms, but worse is the repetition, the endless dip and pull, over and over again. The rhythm must be perfect. Fall out of sync, and you'll be corrected with barked words, or worse, a blow. The deck is damp. Your clothes, too, soaked through from mist and spray. They do not dry. The wool itches where it rubs your neck raw. Your boots are stiff with salt, and yet, this is your life. Many Vikings were farmers, yes, but when summer came, and with it the raiding season, those men became crew. Not all were brave warriors with axes held high. Some were simply here to row. The food is no comfort. A portion of dried fish, already chewed at the edges by time. A hard biscuit that cracks, not crumbles. If you are lucky, there might be dried meat, dark and sinewy, but the fat has long since gone. It's only calories now, not pleasure. The water tastes of smoke and metal, stored in wooden barrels. It's gone sour and stale. Mead is saved for warriors and feasts. For now, your thirst must learn patience. There is no privacy. There is nowhere to be alone. Every sound is shared, every cough, every stomach churn. There are no toilets, only a glance over the side, hoping you don't fall in. Blisters turn to calluses, but new blisters still bloom. Each day, finding a new spot, your hands have not yet hardened. Your shoulders ache. Your spine curves slightly more forward each month at sea. And then the weather turns. The sky darkens, as if a blanket is pulled across it. Thunder murmurs low in the distance. A storm is coming, but there is no harbor, no port. You row harder now, not to reach a destination, but simply to stay alive. The sea is cruel. It lifts the ship, then drops it like a child discarding a toy. The waves batter your face. Your fingers cramp around the oar, refusing to let go even as the wood slips with seawater and sweat. And through it all, the commander, perhaps a Jarl's son, or a man with more beard than brain, shouts encouragements that are mostly curses. He doesn't row, he watches. Some deckhands disappear, lost to sickness, or swept overboard, or struck in battle when they arrive on some distant coast. But that, at least, brings change. Something different, because the rowing never ends, the oars never break, and the sea never tires. And yet, when the stars come out and the air calms, sometimes you look up. You see the night sky stretch across the heavens like a painted dome. You feel the rhythm of your heart matching the rhythm of the waves. For a moment, there is peace, and then another day begins. Imagine a winter's night, long and dark. The stars above are distant and cold, strewn across the sky like frost scattered on a black stone floor. And there, seated by the fire, is a man with a weather-worn face, fur draped across his shoulders, hands folded on his lap, his fingers thick, scarred, and cracked from years of hard use. His name is Egil Skallagrimsson, and his presence in the sagas is both formidable and strange. He was not just a Viking. He was something more complicated, paradoxical blend of brute strength and poetic sensitivity. His father was a fierce and uncompromising man, known as much for his silence as for his strength. Different. At the tender age of 3, he is said to have composed his first poem. Not a simple rhyme, but a verse imbued with melancholy and thought. By the age of 7, he had already committed his first killing, striking down a boy in a game that had turned violent. It was not dismissed, it was not forgiven, but neither was it wholly condemned. In the cold, stern logic of Viking Age society, the boy's violence was met with a child's fierce assertion of honor. As he grew, so did the tension between his two natures. The warrior within him was relentless. Yet, beneath the surface, or perhaps running alongside it, was the poet. Egil's poems were not gentle lullabies. They were iron-forged laments, carefully measured in TT meter, filled with kennings, those poetic metaphors the Norse favored. He did not simply say the sea. He spoke of the railroad. He did not mention a sword. He wrote of the flame of battle. His language carried weight, not just ornament. And through that language, he captured the moods and sorrows of a man who had seen too much. He crossed paths with kings. He insulted rulers, defied customs, and made enemies at every turn. Most famously, Egil quarreled with King Eirik Bloodaxe and his queen Gunn. After a series of insults, legal battles, and deaths, Egil was captured and sentenced to execution. Egil asked for one final night, not to pray, not to flee, but to compose a poem. In the shadow of death, he wrote Hafalason Hedrensum. It was a praise poem to the very king who planned to kill him. But this was no cowardly flattery. It was a precise, balanced, artistically complex piece of work. It is easy to imagine Egil there, standing in chains, body bruised, beard matted, eyes clear and defiant, speaking not with threat or plea, but with rhythm and metaphor. Yet his battles were not always against men. Later in life, Egil experienced grief that no weapon could conquer. The death of his beloved son Bodvar crushed him. In response, Egil did what he always had. He turned to verse. What emerged was Sonatorek, the loss of sons, widely considered one of the most heartfelt poems in Old Norse literature. In it, he does not mask his sorrow behind grand phrases. He mourns plainly, with quiet rage and resignation. He accuses the gods, he laments his helplessness. He confesses the futility of a warrior's strength against the cruelty of fate. These are not the words of a berserker, but of a father hollowed by sorrow. The poem ends not with vengeance or redemption, but with a kind of grim acceptance. Life has hurt him deeply, but he remains. Wounded, yes, but unbroken. The silver may never have existed, or it may still lie buried, waiting. His death is quiet in the saga. It was so thick, they said, that an axe blade would not pierce it. A fitting ending for a man whose mind and body were equally unyielding. In Egil, we glimpse the complexity of Viking life, not often captured in popular imagination. And now, as the fire dims and his verses echo into silence, we turn to something far less poetic, but no less revealing. To the unglamorous truths hidden beneath the Viking surface, quite literally. As we drift gently from the saga halls and poetic laments of Egil Skallagrimsson, let us settle into something quieter and perhaps less glamorous. Beneath every towering longhouse, behind every stern warrior's scowl, there was the same human need, mundane, inescapable, and utterly ordinary, the call of nature. Yes, even Vikings had to go. It might not be the subject of epic poetry, but understanding how Viking societies managed waste offers a curious and grounding insight into daily life, one that is surprisingly intimate. Archaeology, in this case, does not romanticize, it simply preserves. Let's begin with the setting. Viking Age homesteads were typically composed of turf and timber structures, squat and built for practicality. Around these homes, the landscape would have included livestock, pens, storage pits, workshops, and somewhere, discreetly placed, a latrine. These were not separate outhouses, as we might imagine today, nor were they complex indoor facilities. More often, latrines took the form of simple pits, sometimes lined with wood, stone, or turf, covered with a board, or sometimes left open. They were typically located a short walk from the house, far enough to keep the smell at bay, close enough to reach without too much effort in the snow. Excavations at sites like Jorvik, the Viking settlement beneath modern-day York, have uncovered wooden seats, composting pits, and even preserved fecal matter, known to archaeologists by the rather charming term coprolites. These findings are not merely amusing curiosities, they tell us what Vikings ate, what parasites afflicted them, and how they coexisted with their environment. Imagine yourself squatting over a rough plank on a chilly morning. There's no privacy as we know it, perhaps a leather curtain hung nearby, if you were fortunate. The cold bites at your ankles, the damp earth emits its musty breath, and you hope your turn is swift. The outhouse is shared, and the queue is often silent but impatient. And yet, even in this setting, there was a certain rhythm. In rural areas, waste was often composted or disposed of with household rubbish mixed with straw, ash, fish bones, and broken pottery. Some farms used midden heaps, large piles of organic waste that gradually became soil-enriching compost. These heaps were smelly, yes, but functional. They were as necessary as the loom or the blacksmith's forge. The urban Viking experience, particularly in growing towns like Jorvik or Hedeby, was different. With more people packed into closer quarters, sanitation became more pressing. Wooden channels carried wastewater away from homes, sometimes flowing into nearby streams or tidal estuaries. Unfortunately, those same waters were used for washing clothes, and sometimes even collecting drinking water. Illnesses like dysentery and intestinal worms were common, quietly gnawing away at lives already shortened by hard labor and poor nutrition. Archaeologists have found parasite eggs in soil samples beneath latrinesteine, resilient reminders of what lurked in Viking guts. From these findings, we know they lived closely with lice, fleas, and intestinal invaders. Soap was used, especially lye-based cleansers, made from ash and fat, but it could only do so much. Cleanliness was relative. There is also the matter of toilet paper, or the lack thereof. In the Viking world, moss, straw, or even smooth stones were likely used for wiping. None were particularly comfortable. On cold days, the moss may have frozen. On dry ones, the straw might scratch. But such discomforts were simply part of the background noise of life and worthy of complaint. In some regions, particularly in Iceland, thermal springs were used for bathing and perhaps even for waste disposal. The warmth of these springs offered occasional reprieve, a moment of comfort in otherwise chilly routines. But these were luxuries available to few. Interestingly, Viking latrines also served as social markers. Larger farmsteads or wealthier households might have more elaborate setups, deeper pits, wooden structures, or even enclosed sheds. These weren't statements of hygiene as much as statements of status. To defecate in relative privacy was, in a way, to declare one's place in the social order. The spiritual or symbolic dimension of waste is less discussed, but not absent. Some grave goods include grooming tools, tweezers, earpicks, and combs. Cleanliness had value, and perhaps ritual significance. In Norse mythology, the body is often described as sacred even when broken or burned. To cleanse oneself may have been as much about dignity as it was about comfort. And so, through this humble lens, we glimpse another side of Viking life. One not of heroic conquest or seafaring glory, but of daily necessity. Behind the myths and the violence were people with cold feet, sore stomachs, and the ever-present need to find a suitable place to squat. Let the crackling of the fire return now. Let the image fade, the soil, the straw, the bitter wind. What remains is not disgust, but connection. The reminder that beneath every armor-clad raider was a man or woman shaped by the same bodily needs we know today. Now, we turn our attention upward from the latrine pit to the chieftain's hall. Two feasts, illuminated by flickering torchlight, where tension simmered under the surface of shared mead and whispered alliances. Up next, we step into the uneasy luxury of a Viking Jarl's feast. Let the clatter of rough clay bowls and the sweet, sticky scent of fermented honey begin to drift in. The firelight flickers low in a great hall thick with smoke and shadows. You find yourself in the presence of a Viking Jarl, a regional chieftain. His longhouse is broad and timber-framed. The wooden beams overhead blackened by years of open flame, and the air is heavy with the mingled aromas of roasted meat, sour ale, damp wool, and sweat. Imagine yourself seated on a fur-covered bench. Your cup is wooden, your fingers numb from the wind outside. You are nobody important, perhaps a trader invited for your news, a skald asked to perform, or a warrior recently returned from sea. Whatever your station, you have been welcomed, but the air is far from relaxed. Feasts in the Viking Age were not mere indulgences. They were arenas of power, of diplomacy and danger, dressed in song and stew. The Jarl, seated at the high sea trays above the others, flanked by his huskarls, loyal armed retainers. Their axes lean within reach. These men are his teeth, his strength made flesh. Around them, the other guests are arranged by status and favor, a social map clearer than any words. Where you sit, and who is seated below or above you, speaks volumes. The food, when it comes, is hearty but humble by today's standards. Boiled lamb or fatty pork, chewy bread baked on hearthstones, stews thick with root vegetables. Everything is served family style by thrall slaves who move quietly, heads bowed. There are no forks. Fingers tear meat, dip crusts into broth, wipe grease on rough linen or unwashed sleeves. The centerpiece of the feast is not the food, but the mead of fermented honey drink that both gladdened the heart and loosened the tongue. Mead was both gift and weapons. A generous Jarl might ensure your cup stayed full all night. A calculating one might watch what truths you spilled once it did. Conversation at these feasts was a dance. Stories were traded as carefully as blows in battle. Skalds performed poems praising the host's deeds, comparing him to gods or noble ancestors. Warriors boasted of past victories, always just short of insulting their rivals. Merchants spoke cautiously of prices and ports, but all was performance, every word heard by ears that remembered insults long after the cups were drained. The hall grew warmer with each hour. Shadows deepened, the torches flared, sometimes sputtering in draughts that slipped through the walls. Voices rose. Laughter turned sharp. Somewhere, an argument flickered like a spark. It might be nothing, or it might end in a duel outside before dawn. Even at its height, the feast was never truly safe, because honor was the real guest of honor, invisible, brittle thing that demanded satisfaction. One wrong word, one joke made at the wrong man's expense, and steel could flash. The Jarl might frown, or he might smile and pour another cup. Either response could be read as blessing or trap. And yet, these gatherings were essential. They bound Viking society together through alliances, marriages, gossip, and the raw performance of wealth. A Jarl who could host well-gained renown, one who could not, found himself isolated. Not all guests were equal. Some were merely tolerated. A neighboring chief whose loyalty was uncertain, a cousin with claims to land, a Christian monk, perhaps, kept for novelty or interrogation. Each one drank with a different kind of thirst, some for the mead, some for the secrets. And outside, in the cold dark of the Nordic night, the dogs barked occasionally. The stars turned slowly above the longhouse. The earth froze a little deeper. Inside, by contrast, the warmth of bodies and fire held back the world. For now, when the feast ended, whether in song or scuffle, laughter or blood, the Jarl would withdraw to his chamber, leaving others to sleep in heaps by the hearth, or to brave the walk back home under the pale moon. The embers would glow, the thralls would clean, and the next day the world would go. Andeals struck, enmities kindled, promises made under the influence of mead and firelight. Imagine now the silence after the hall empties, the creak of wood, the low crackle of fading flames, all the bravado and tension soaked into the walls like smoke. And in that quiet, something else lingers. A question, a truth, that beneath all the shouting, the posturing, the feasting, and the fear Viking life was not one of constant conquest. It was a life of balance, constantly negotiated between violence and survival, myth and reality, bone-deep loyalty and ever-looming risk. The feast was merely a mirror, and now we come to the close of our long and wandering evening. And so, dear listener, as the coals dim and the ancient winds soften their whisper, we leave behind the world of the Vikings, a place far more complex and far more human than the legends often suggest. You have rowed the longboats with blistered hands and empty stomach. You've watched Egil Skallagrimson weave verse and violence in equal measure. You've stood in the cold, squatting over rough boards in a Viking latrine, pondering the daily realities so rarely carved into saga stone. And you've sat beneath the smoky rafters of a Jarl's longhouse, cup in hand, heart cautious as laughter tangled with menace. And through it all, a pattern emerged, not of glory, but of grit, of lives that moved to the rhythm of the tide and the hearth. In a land where summer was brief and winter eternal, where the stories told were not just for entertainment, but for anchoring identity, and where survival meant not just strength, but community, memory, and myth. There is something soothing in knowing that even the fearsome Vikings, those axe-wielding specters of European folklores, spent most of their days mending nets, stirring pots, telling tales, and navigating the fragile fabric of honor and need. So now, as you drift into sleep, picture once more the gentle slap of water against the hull of a ship in a fjord at twilight, the low hum of a skald rehearsing lines, the smell of damp pine, and the faint sweetness of honey left on your tongue. History, like sleep, is not always clear-cut. It flows, sometimes in shadows, sometimes in firelight, but always it hums beneath us, quietly shaping who we are and how we rest. May your dreams be peaceful. May they carry you softly through the folds of time. And until next time, sleep well.